I'm going to kick off today with a performance of one of the poems I've written about Bill Gibb as part of my project, the Bill Gibb Line. And I'll actually be doing a few poems today and telling Gibb's story through poetry as well as through the talk. So before I get going on the presentation, I'll start with this first poem just at the very beginning of his career. And it's set in the Handsome Cabin, a pub, on the 15th of February in 1967. In a pub at the top of Earls Court Road, the barmaid's fancy dress suggests we've entered the Edwardian era. Oh, please, with a fashion-forward press, we'll have no trips to the past, dears. At the start of the show, we're thrown. Who dares cut a coat in a sweeping curve before dropping plumb straight to the hem? Who pairs lilac and camel check and mushroom shoulders on a plain white dress? We sigh with relief at trousers caught, harem style in tight anklets, exotic. We're simply sick of mini skirts and feel the pinch on these drafty days. But are lower hemlines here to stay? What novel treatment of traditional tweed, amethyst and white with inverted pleats? And witness the birth of the kilted suit, a tartan skirt and brief bolero in Macmillan rainbow hues. As wildflowers and powder blue, we hunt for seed pearls embroidered on collar and cuff. But on a little black chiffon shift, we cannot miss the sleeves, huge puff. These gay boutique clothes are for young, but not cookie clients who crave individuality. Down in hard-bitten London town we rave. Bill Gibb's name has been made. So welcome to From Fireman to Fashion, the life and work of Bill Gibb. My name's Shane Strachan and I'm a performer and writer based in Aberdeen. And I was commissioned in 2019 to work on a sort of exhibition celebrating Bill Gibb for the Look Again Visual Art and Design Festival in Aberdeen, which led to the creation of the poem you just heard and the format that I took with exploring Gibb's life and work. So this is a picture of me dressed in one of the outfits that were created by students at Gray's School of Art in Aberdeen as part of that. And I'll explore this project more as I go on. But my own interest in Bill started a bit earlier than that because I'm actually from the Broch, Fraserburgh, on the very northeast corner of Scotland. And I was aware of Bill Gibb primarily through this display in the local heritage centre there, which has some of his work. And it always fascinated me as someone coming from Fraserburgh, which is quite a kind of hyper-masculine fishing town, for someone to go on to be a fashion designer. It was quite inspiring and unusual and kind of an unexpected story. And that kind of caught my interest at a young age, as well as some of my family having gone to school around the same time as him. And so yeah, I could never have imagined when I found out someone, from a farming background, particularly, he wasn't from a fishing background. His family were farmers and had farms on the outskirts of the town, and some of them still work on the land today. And for him to go on to then be in the pages of Vogue and be one of the biggest designers in Britain throughout the 70s, it's so unexpected, but also I think what I was surprised by at the same time as I came to hear about him is how his story had kind of faded out a little bit and he'd been maybe a bit more forgotten in the kind of fashion narrative since then. And that might be partly due to the fact that he died so young at the age of 44 in 1988. And that also he was quite a shy person. He wasn't really someone who push himself out there compared to people, kind of some of his contemporaries like Ozzy Clark. But you can see in this image here just how fun and vibrant and eclectic his style was. And he would take references from everywhere and everything and kind of mash them together in this post-modernist style that was very, of the late 60s going into the 70s, associated with hippie styles, with fantasy and romantic wear, and kind of ultra traditionally feminine clothes, taking references from folkwear, from other countries a lot of the time for Gibb's work. He was really interested in, like you can see the folkwear here, Russian kind of influence and this circus-like style. And he also, you can see kind of parallels, and he's often referred to as the kind of British or Scottish Yves Saint Laurent, and had a similar kind of trajectory in terms of the styles and the influences he took and how he pieced them all together. So the photo on the left here is actually from his aunt's collection of photos, who I met a couple of years ago while I was researching for the Bill Gibb line. And he grew up with her, and he was with the eldest of 7, so he actually was brought up by his grandparents on a nearby farm to the rest of his siblings and his parents, and lived with his aunt and his grandmother, who was something of an artist, and she painted watercolors, and I think she was quite unusual in a sense, in being a farmer's wife with this kind of creative interest for the area at the time, and really sparked his own interest in drawing and illustrating and painting, and kind of brought out that creative flair in him, and also encouraged him to go down that route. Whereas, being the eldest of 4 sons, he otherwise would have been expected to continue running the farm, and but he was never kind of held back by his family. He was very much encouraged by them to follow his interests, and was kind of seen as, he said himself, he was the family freak, a bit of a maverick. Something unexpected. Out of 7 children, one of them had to do something that was a bit different. And he went on to show a particular interest in historical fashion and design and costume. And his sisters have said that this is primarily through his interest in film at the time and costume in film. And he was particularly interested by kind of period dramas and so on, and kind of big gowns and traditionally feminine wear. And his art teacher picked up on this interest, Bob Duthie at Fraserburgh Academy, and he pushed him to follow this, and really encouraged him to go to London to study. If you really wanted to pursue a career in fashion, you had to go there. And Bob Duthie had actually gone to a London art school himself. So Gibb went to St Martin's School of Art, now Central St Martin's, but St Martin's School of Art at that point in time in 1962. And he struggled to begin with, because he felt very aware of how different he was. And most people at that time, I think it was around the time actually when fees became free. So up to that point, a lot of people who were studying fashion tended to be from the middle or upper classes, and it was quite hobbyist. It was more dressmaking, learn to make a dress, and have an interest in that. A lot of them wouldn't then pursue a career. It was mainly women. So a lot changed in the 60s, and he was just at the start of all that. So he felt very out of place, and he obviously spoke broad Doric, broad Northeast Scots, so he struggled to communicate and to kind of feel like he fit in. But after almost quitting, his parents managed to encourage him, and the dean of the school, the head of the fashion department, Muriel Pemberton, encouraged him to stay. And he went on to excel and become top of his class. But he did struggle with the making elements. He was definitely more someone who was great at drawing and kind of creating a design on paper, but it required, kind of realized he had to work and collaborate with others to create his kind of amazing designs. And he also went on to Royal College of Art and a scholarship, but kind of success beckoned, and he ended up opening up his own shops, and things just took off from there. So you can see him on the right here, sitting next to John Bates, and you also see Ozzie Clark and Sandra Rhodes and Jean Muir, and this was a picture of kind of all the other designers that were, the big names of their time. And he went on to have many celebrity clients. He often he met and often helped dress Elizabeth Taylor. He was close friends with Twiggy. This is a picture of them arriving at Aberdeen train station when she went to visit his family in Fraserburgh, and went to Inverness with him as well. And there's kind of stories of them driving in a golden Rolls Royce, and his brothers being very impressed by this. And and the sisters kind of really being taken with Twiggy and being surprised at how down to earth she was and how she would, helped out with doing the dishes at home and so on. And they were very close friends, and she kind of helped launch his career a little bit as well in terms of wearing some of his commission designs for her film premieres of The Boyfriend. So celebrity was a big part of his success, and Bianca Jagger, Lulu, lots of Joan Taylor, lots of other names associated with Gibb. What draws me to these clothes as a writer is I guess they all tell stories, and I think he was very, a lot of his own research and his own interests were really driven by history and narratives, and he spent a lot of time in the British Museum and the V&A and really study other cultures and British history and Scottish fashions and so on. He would really get to understand and know why things were the way they were, and really had a big interest in pattern in particular. And so for me, I was really drawn to how the clothes almost have their own narratives and how he collages ideas from all these different places. It kind of felt to me like it resonated with my own process, particularly of creating poetry, of bringing different ideas all into the one place and creating something new from that. So finding different inspirations, and a lot of, you can see here just the complete kind of contrast and patterns and designs that he managed to somehow bring together in harmony. And I found that particularly interesting and inspiring. And I was fortunate enough to be given an award from the Scottish Book Trust to pursue a larger project on Gibb after writing a short story about Twiggy visiting his family farm before. And I was initially interested in maybe doing a novel, but it became quite apparent over time that poetry would be the way forward in performance. As part of that project, I kind of only came to that over time, and so I did a fair bit of research because I didn't really have any interest in fashion before this project. I wasn't really aware of how things were made, how the fashion industry worked. So I really went out of my way to try and research as much as possible. And I was really fortunate to have a lot of support from Gibb's sisters in particular, and met his mother as well. And so that's them on the left there, two of his sisters and his mother. And they were really great at kind of giving me that backstory of how he got to where he did, and how they felt about this kind of celebrity world and being involved with that, and how he adapted to his kind of success. I was also really fortunate to meet Kay Fassett, who was his romantic partner at one point, but also very much a business partner and collaborator. And the work they did together really was what got him on the pages of Vogue and the Sunday Times, and that they brought basically knitwear to the high street of Britain, and did that kind of through pairing knitwear with different textures and fabrics and patterns in a kind of bohemian, hippie look that brought together traditional patterns and knits from Britain, but did it in this way that kind of felt a bit more like Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco vibes, where Kaffe is from California. So there was a lot of influences there internationally on this style coming to Britain. And it was really fascinating to meet him and just hear, he's still he's in his 80s now, and he's still working, he's still creating, he's still doing so many fabulous things, and it's just really inspiring. And I also got in tow with Gray's School of Art, Fashion and Textiles students as well, and the department were great in terms of basically using it as a platform to get as a research project for their students to learn more about Gibb as well. And while I simultaneously was learning about how they learned and how they studied. And this was kind of really catalyst for all this was the Look Again Festival, and also the discovery of these pattern cuttings that had been found in a office at Gray's School of Art. Almost kind of, it could have easily been thrown out, but they were discovered, and it was like donation that kind of just drifted out of being properly secured. And I think it just shows that what can happen with archives and with important documents if someone, it's what is easily, you can easily forget someone over time, and how important it is to save these things and store them safely. And now they are, thankfully, in the RGU Art and Heritage collections. And these are pattern cuttings from Gibbs' final big show in 1985, which was inspired by the Bronze Age. And we used these as an inspiration for the students as well to kind of create new garments. And there was lots of little notes in his own handwriting, his own sketches, letters to people. Sometimes he was printing on the back of, hospital letters from when he was very ill. So there's stories and all these things that are hidden away that I find so fascinating. And we went to, with the students, we went to Aberdeen Art Gallery, to their store, the Treasure Hub there, where they have the biggest store of the Gibb archive. And I think that was really important because a lot of the students were struggling with the fact that when they Googled Gibb, they couldn't find all these images they just wanted to be able to easily find his images of work and just reference it. And it that's how they were used to researching. So to actually have to go into an archive and look at the real material, I think it was just a really exciting process. And a lot of them were really drawn to kind of how beautiful his drawings are, and the skill, the talent. They're kind of works of art in their own right. And this is an example of this from Gibbs' kind of first breakthrough collection, for his own company in 1972. It was actually featured in a documentary, a 30-minute documentary on the BBC, exploring the kind of the drama of putting together a fashion show at the last minute, kind of, all the models still had pins and everything in them just before they were going on the catwalk, and it really got his name out there, and was attended by Cecil Beaton and Twiggy and all the big names of fashion at the time. So I'll perform this poem as well, and this kind of captures all the, I guess for me, it's the capturing the kind of personas and the characters behind the scenes, but also the characters and personas that are created when you put on clothes, the way it changes things. This is why I change my voice when performing these poems as well. The Oriental Club, 26th of April, 1972. From the tip of her well-coiffured head to the soles of her platform shoes, Kelly's always ready to jump on a jet whenever a camera clicks in some faraway place. This highly individual face left the States and ditched her degree when some guy in Chicago threw stardust in her eyes and said, "You should be a model, babe." Half black and half Cherokee, some designers are scared of people staring at her skin instead of the fancy clothes she's in. But Billy knows better. As a coat billows behind her, Kelly glides up the catwalk in a special treat for autumn-winter, a crepe dress edged with lace that she spreads wide like wings. And next, her circular skirt swings as her marabou and ostrich hat, feather boa to match, drips with velvet ribbons, glass beads, and fabric flowers made of suede. To finish, she's a minx and lynx, hand-painted on a white wool dress with lamb and mutton sleeves, and dangling from her neck, suede and leather strings hang down toward her python skin shoes. Between shoots and shows, she's just a blue jean kid, enjoys needlework to keep her mojo flowing. Some petty point, some heroin. But there's no better kick than audience applause to make her feel like a goddess, especially when she hears them say, "If only I could walk that way." So as well as viewing the drawings in the archive, I spent a lot of time looking through the newspaper clippings, and they became a big part of creating these poems and understanding Gibbs' story. It's kind of where Gibbs' story now resides, other than the oral kind of stories that's getting from his family. And I guess what you start to realize looking through newspaper clippings is there are a lot of contradictions, a lot of kind of falsehoods, and people writing that he spoke Gaelic when he actually was Scots, and then that he had blonde hair, that he had red hair, that he had brown hair. Like there was just always these kind of different takes on who he actually was. So it's kind of trying to piece the truth, and that's very difficult. So I guess that's why I turned to the artifice of poetry as well. And yeah, looking through various archives, including the one at Central St Martin's and Fraserburgh Heritage Centre as well. But what was fascinating, particularly about the kind of newspaper clippings, is I was really taken with the language of poetry and the fact it's got inherently got this beautiful rhythms and rhymes, and it's kind of lots of fantastic, rich words that really work to give texture to a poem, just in the way that the textures and the fabrics of the clothes themselves. And also, often the newspapers would pick up on these kind of characters that are naturally come from dressing in these fabulous outfits. You've got the Grecian, the caveman, the Parisian. So it was kind of easy to quite quickly start to kind of collage a poem together from these different voices that form these texts. And there is other writers who've done this. There's a collection called House of McQueen, looking at Alexander McQueen's work. And this is a great collection, but I found that it's quite abstract and opaque in places. It's working the same way using verbatim, but it's often, I guess, just could be quite difficult. And I was thinking more about being as accessible as something like Hamilton or Six, something a bit more pop, sing-songy, something that for people, I want people know Alexander McQueen, but maybe not as many people know Gibbs. So I need to get people on board. So I have to make it as kind of accessible as possible in the first instance. And then I can get a slightly more abstract and poetic in places, I guess, is how I've seen it. But not only the words, I've also been really drawn to the visuals, and there's just some beautiful editorials and kind of photography from the various collections from all over the world. I think like at this point, it's just amazing how far kind of some of these photo shoots would go, where I don't even think they'd have the budget nowadays to pull some of this off. And I'll read this poem just to kind of give a flavor of that. And it kind of shows all the influences Gibb had at this point. And I'll apologize, this is my David Attenborough poem voice. Travel the world in an ancient map, printed on champagne satin, billowing above a sea of gold and silver stripes. In the Baghdad room of Topkapi Palace, wake in baggy harem pants and a golden top with immense sleeves and a gilded peacocks. In a leather star and medallion printed smock, walk in the steps of Cecil Beaton's Bolivian aunt, all packered and bowler-hatted on Lake Titicaca. With no telephone distractions on Breslin, finish your trip in a black Lancola karate wrap, unwinding on white Seychelles wild sands. You'll find it all in Bill Gibbs' finest and final Baccarat collection, back home at Harrods of London. So this was just before his big show in 1972. He was actually doing a lot of work for Baccarat, who were kind of a sub-couture fashion house at that time. But it led to him getting in with Harrods, who became kind of a big supporter of him, even when his career was tougher later in his life. As part of my fellowship from the Scottish Book Trust, I got to go to France for a month, and that was really great to be able to look at kind of the wider fashion scene and to be able to visit like Yves Saint Laurent's studio and to see a real fashion studio, how it looks and how kind of detailed and messy and creative and inviting all of that is. And then there was also an exhibition, a retrospective of Grayson Perry's work at that time, and I kind of was thinking along these lines of, you know, putting on clothes and performance and persona and so on, and how that changes through clothes, so the power of clothes. And I'd also read a fair bit about Andrew Logan, and Andrew Logan was one of Gibbs' friends. They worked together on some jewelry, and he often, Logan would create some kind of broken mirrored jewelry, metal, that to suit his kind of later collections that became a bit more punky as it moved into the 80s. But Andrew Logan is also famous for creating the alternative Miss Universe competition, which is now a huge event when it takes place every few years in London. And it was very much like a cult underground event when it first started. And it's, you know, kind of one of the kind of presidents of drag in the UK now. But one thing he's famous for is this 50-50 dress. And Logan made the first one, he wears it as the host, and he made the first one himself with a dress from a charity shop and a suit from a charity shop. But the second alternative Miss Universe, Gibb helped him create something a little bit more upmarket, shall we say. And then the year after that, Xander Rhodes actually embellished Gibb's earlier dress. And these are all on display in the Andrew Logan Museum in Wales. And so there's some links there with this kind of gender kind of play and being part of this culture. I think some of the stars of the Rocky Horror Show attended a lot of Gibb's shows and so on as well. So I found that quite interesting in terms of performance and the dressing up sense. And I was also from a visual arts perspective, I've really always enjoyed Cindy Sherman's work. And some of her earliest work is this kind of video of paper dolls' dresses being stuck onto a woman, and that changes her representation and presentation. And also Rachel McLean's used a lot of verbatim in costume in her work, and I use a lot of verbatim in my own theatre performances. So using real texts and taking on the persona of the voices of the people who speak them. So I went back after France, I went back and saw the students' work and decided to wear it and pick pieces that suited my poems and perform. So I was thinking about the pieces really that evoked Gibb's style. So the students were actually kind of looking at his work and then doing their own modern day interpretation of the things that influenced them. And so I'll show you some images of their work alongside reading some more poems, and also explain the link there and how it links with Gibb's style and work. And this was all filmed at Robert Gordon's in their green screen room. But I kept all that in the film that I created, kept the green screen in, kept the sense of this being an artifice and a retelling of the narrative. So the poem I read at the start is this one, and this is out of war, that kind of has all this pleating that's mentioned, and pleats and tartan, and that was often in Gibb's work. And this was really fun to wear and spread my arm out and kind of come to life. I think I didn't quite do it justice in the film because I'm sitting down, but I think this image really captures the student's work. The second poem I read, this is, I guess, an unusual take on knitwear, a modern day unusual take on knitwear, and I think that's kind of captures the innovativeness of what Gibb was doing. And Gibb across his career really had to push the boundaries of manufacture and had to go to factories and ask them to create, lots of reproductions of patterns and knits that hadn't been done before, where it wasn't possible in Britain up to that point, and kind of were taking risks and financial risks and mass producing some of his quite difficult designs alongside Kay Fassett. And the student who created the trousers, two different students who paired things together in places. The student created these trousers was inspired by the kind of hippie aspect, hippie culture, and looked at festivals during the 70s to create that pattern. So I'll read this poem, and this kind of captures, this outfit, I guess, captures Gibb's daring mix of pattern on pattern. And this poem explores this layering of it in his work throughout his career. Kinsman Morrison Art Gallery, Maddox Street, 30th of April, 1974. Congratulations, bother-booted Bill Gibb, for filling an art gallery full of too many people, including two Beatles wives and Bianca Jagger, and keeping them happy for over an hour. A legging case and a striped sock and a boot now stamps as posters, invitations, and the opening of the show. To follow, Brenda Arnault set the mood for this collection by miming to step in the right direction, while covered up in this season's look, a polo sweater and kimono sleeve jacket in lavender, turquoise, black and Bordeaux, a knitted tapestry effect by Kay Fassett, all echoed in a skirt and Audubon tweed, with even the shoes continuing the theme. The Don Quixote of the layered look then piled up sweaters and Dr. Zhivago furs and cardigans and burgundy and aubergine before revealing grand evening dresses in smoke grey Gianna and the softest of velvets. To finish, he allied his vast crinoline dress of 2 seasons past with his net mantillas of last and a Miss Havisham look that made Mrs. Jago gasp. A triumph over commonplace present-day gloom. There was no room to stamp above a boot. Otherwise, Gibbs' final ovation would have surely boomed. This next poem is it actually is quite fits a certain poetic form, which is the Japanese tanka, which the first 3 lines are kind of what we would know as a haiku, and the English version of the haiku being 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, and the first 3 lines. And then in a tanka, that's followed by 2 further 7-syllable lines. And this is to do with the fact that this collection it refers to had a lot of influences from Japanese culture, and there was a lot of kimono cuts and looks. So I was trying to get that in the language itself, although sticking quite closely to the actual language used to describe the clothes. And this voice I take on for this one is actually kind of try to capture the change from maybe the last poem into this one, the change across the 70s. As the fashion reviewers, so that Janet Street Porter became a fashion reviewer during this time, and I guess it's capturing the fact that a lot of working class voices and accents were starting to move up into the fashion world, like Gibb himself. So it's kind of got a touch of her voice throughout. Bruton Place, 28th of October, 1976. In the fashion world, Gibb has gone oriental. The swart kimono starkly framed in the finest black satin and Indian silk. For the trendy bride, there's a daring wedding dress, reminiscent of Victorian underwear and white broderie anglais. Granny won't like it, but those old underpinnings of a yesteryear have been freed from the boudoir as tomorrow's outer gear. This year's collection seems intent on promoting sensuality. The necklines have been lowered and the sides of skirts are split. And when the skirts whirl and slit to reveal the voile and lace underneath, you get a delicious peep at the world's dearest panties. We live in tough times with our country tottering towards bankruptcy, but our clothes won't stop being the witziest in Europe. So the end of that poem there, and actually I guess it's kind of alluded to in the earlier poem about the present day doom and gloom. The 70s, there was recessions, Euro crisis, and also there's mention of tottering towards bankruptcy. So very much like our own times. And that had a big impact on the fashion world. It was not easy to be a fashion designer in Britain, and there was a real lack of support from the government compared to Italian governments, France, Spain, for their designers. When things got tough, there was kind of things they could fall back on and support, but there wasn't in Britain. So if you had bumps in the road or any kind of financial issues, it was really hard to recover from that. And Gibb was bitten hard around he had a massive show in 1977 at the Royal Albert Hall. And it was one of the biggest fashion shows ever, and had about 7,000 people viewed it that day. And it's kind of was this Icarus moment. It's kind of, he himself felt, I think, a little bit that he was flying too high and that he didn't really deserve this 10-year retrospective, all this kind of fuss over him. He really didn't like it. He wasn't someone who liked having all that attention, and he really was quite nervous and stressed out about being out on the catwalk with his models. He was more concerned about, what's the next collection? What else can I create? He really was always just pushing himself, and quite a lot of his energy and consumed him a little bit to have to put on a show as well. So after that, the Albert Hall show, he he discovered that he never was interested in the financial side, and discovered that the people he trusted to look after that hadn't really been doing their job properly, and he was hundreds of £1,000s in debt, which also is, you know, a lot of money at that time. And it happened a couple of times really, and really had a huge impact on his career. And so this next poem is kind of capturing this in between the two kind of financial bumps he had. This is him trying to get back and trying to get his work out there. And he had a show at the Hyde Park Hotel. He often had his kind of spring, summer for the next year. His show would take place then. And I think Princess Margaret actually attended this one in particular. And this is kind of, these two sections, stanzas, the first and last, are verbatim his words from a newspaper interview. And I think he was told, you know, you can't keep embellishing and putting all these expensive kind of textures and sequins and all these things, like it costs too much to produce and you're not making enough profit. So his new investors were like, you need to cut back. And he really struggled with that and having to do more high street friendly pricing and designs. And you can see this kind of shift towards things being slimmed down and the design here on the left. I haven't included the usual embellishments because I think people believe they're there to hide a designer's lack of shape and line. See-through taps and trousers in gold and black, buckle-tied belts in crepe de chine, knot overskirts at the waist and a rune and ankle, exposed bare flesh and strapless jersey tops, criss-cross, here and there with slivers of material, cut great slits in the sides of skirts, wrap a silk choker, ruin your neck. So this time I didn't add anything too fantastic. It's all very 1979 without losing the Bill Gibb line. And beyond this point, going into the 80s, there was a big shift in British fashion away from kind of the fantastical romantic garments that signified escapism, 70s escapism. And there was a shift obviously to kind of power dressing and punk in the 80s, and Gibb style just didn't sit with that shift really. And he struggled to kind of ever come back to the same heights that he'd been at, and had to rely more on private commissions. And then he got ill and died of bowel cancer in 1988. So it really is a sad kind of end to his story, and I think is kind of one of the reasons I'm really passionate about trying to get the word out there about him to younger audiences in particular. So I was really happy to be able to do that to the Look Again exhibition, and that was back in 2019 in the summer. And then from there, I was invited to re-exhibit at Aberdeen Art Gallery and actually do it alongside beautiful works of Gibbs that they have in their collection, which was really exciting, and alongside some of his drawings as well. And then it was open for a month before the first lockdown hit. And I was really fortunate that they reopened it, and it kind of was there on and off throughout the rest of 2020. And it was supposed to be taken down on the 10th of January, but I think it's probably still sitting there waiting to be taken down. So it's had the longest run ever probably for a temporary exhibition at Aberdeen Art Gallery. But one of the other ways I wanted to get the work out there was actually through a podcast. I decided in the end was a great way to showcase the wider story and have all the poems out there in an oral form for people to hear, because there's only 6 in the film, and there was only about 8 featured in the exhibition, but there's probably about 15 or 16 poems. And then I recorded that at the National Theatre of Scotland. They were really great in supporting me with that. And there's 3 episodes, 20 minutes each, which are available to listen to in Spotify and Apple. And it's what I learned over time from speaking to his family and friends and looking at all the newspaper articles and kind of really struggling to work out what really is the truth when there's huge gaps in his story. I decided to use more verbatim from his actual quotations and slice together him telling his story in his own words. So in between the poems, the narrative is actually composed of him telling his words, and it felt like that was the fairest way to represent him when he's not here to kind of tell his side of the story otherwise. So that's all available and online to listen to for free. And today, what I'm really excited about is to perform a new poem for you. And this is inspired by, I'm sure many of you have seen this dress in the Scottish Design Gallery in the V&A since it opened. And it's known as the Tara dress and was created in 1972. And it belonged to Sandy Shaw, who donated to the V&A. And she wore it for an event at the London Palladium in 1972. So you've got an image of her wearing it there on the left. And this is just some of the kind of key features. So when I'm creating a poem, I'm looking for any texts I can find on kind of for inspiration and language and things I can take and then collage together into a form. And this is from the V&A's own description on their collections database, and it describes the fact that it's 3 Liberty of London fabrics. So this is what Gilbert often did, is taken 3 fabrics that were actually often from different designers, or maybe were never intended to be put together. He would make things work that maybe just other designers wouldn't see, and then sketch that out, and he would stick swatches onto his designs and pass it on to his pattern cutter and so on, Nevis, an Italian pattern cutter who stayed with him throughout his career, would just kind of apparently just had this magic way of just being able to look at it and cut from just sight of his designs. So this one is, the 3 fabrics are known as Tana Lawn, Nimbus Voile, Country Cotton. There's leg of mutton sleeves, leather streamers with beads, pleated peplum waist. So sleeves, beads, pleats, like just naturally things just start kind of striking off when you read through these rich descriptions. There's various prints and patterns, the floral print, there's kind of this terracotta vines and leaves pattern throughout it. And the peachy terracotta colours are kind of consistent throughout. And also it's described as having a paisley pattern as well. And obviously there's a kind of long history of the paisley pattern in Scotland, and then a longer history of how it came to be in Scotland. And that was primarily through men who worked for the East India Company, bringing it from India across. So, which at that point were known as Kashmir shawls. And there's a great resource on the V&A Dundee website in their stories section with 2 articles so far by Suchita Chowdhury looking at the kind of history of this pattern. And I kind of explored this further and kind of found, this is kind of reading around what interested me and what struck me with this is the kind of teardrop pattern that paisley pattern is famous for. It's known in India as a kotka or butta, and it's often thought to kind of symbolize mangoes in the Kashmir Valley, pine cones, almonds, and it has a further history further back. It's thought to come from Persia and is known as the bote. And so it has roots across a few countries. And I was quite taken with the fact that there's kind of this link with Persia and Iran, because Gibb was later in his career, actually, like I mentioned, was really relied heavily on private commissions. And actually a lot of these private commissions came from the Middle East. So in the kind of late 70s and early 80s, he got by through commissions from women who really wanted these kind of princessy, fantastical garments that made them feel special, and that kind of maybe mixed this East and West influences. They kind of were drawn to that. And one of his clients, who was well known at the time, was Farah Pahlavi, the former Shehbanu of Iran. So she was the Shehbanu up until the late 70s when they kind of ousted from Iran. And she I kind of they just thought like, this kind of fascinates me that he could have been using these patterns that actually really originate from Iran and then kind of repackage them back to someone like Farah who would be kind of get in this circular way. And she was someone who tried to do as much as she could for women's rights within the limitations she had. So she set up a university and encouraged a lot of female students. And I find her quite an interesting person. And she kind of represents the ideal client for Gibb. He was really interested in powerful women. And he kind of always, it wasn't about, it was much about the kind of women who wore his clothes being the right personality for them, as much as rather than maybe the right body shape or so on. He tried to create flattering clothes for all. So I kind of went down this route of exploring these links with kind of the Shabanu and this figure in the past. And there's this like junk history meme online that kind of suggests that the figure on the right here, that it kind of is taken with the fact that it's a woman with facial hair and it's a sign of beauty in Iran in the 19th century. But there's a lot of like, really mistaken facts around this, and it's kind of exaggerated and overblown. But there was at some point this kind of there was a beauty symbol having a faint moustache and having fuller eyebrows and things that maybe we seen as masculine. But as well as that, there's the Princess Fatima Khanum, her younger sister. Both of them were kind of pioneering feminists for their time, and they were the daughters of a Shah. And this is just one quotation I'll read about kind of from the younger daughter's own memoirs. When the day comes that I see my sex emancipated and my country on the path to progress, I will sacrifice myself in the battlefield of liberty and freely shed my blood under the feet of my freedom-loving cohorts seeking their rights. And I found this was part of influence in the poem, but also linking very back to like the fact that Sandy Shaw wore the garment in her song about being a puppet on a string. And actually it's very anti-feminist. It's basically saying, I'll do whatever you want. I'll be a puppet on a string if you say you love me. So this kind of fed into this, who would Gibb want his clothes to be worn by, and what kind of, I kind of decided to create this fictional Shabanu for this. So I'll read the poem now and you'll kind of see these different influences seeping into it in reference to this beautiful work from V&A Collections. Queen of Queens. I am the Shabanu, queen of queens. My teardrops are caught on my paisley patterned sleeves. I am not your puppet. I pull my own strings, long leather streamers with bright clacking beads, ensure I'm always heard before I'm ever seen, sheathed in this lattice of terracotta leaves. I am the Shabanu, queen of queens. My teardrops are caught on my paisley patterned sleeves. My eyebrows are full, my lip hairs are preened, the pleats in my peplum are pressed and steamed, the squares at my neckline stream down to my feet, every stitch an ellipsis that echoes through the weave. I am the Shabanu, queen of queens. My teardrops are caught on my paisley patterned sleeves. Veiled in nimbus wild of peaches and cream, you may think that my life's a dream of liberty, but my flesh is sealed up by all these hidden seams, my countrymen's desires to reign supreme. I am the Shabanu, queen of queens. My teardrops are caught on my paisley patterned sleeves.